Vienna, Austria, March 1938. The scent of jasmine and bergamot filled the small perfumery on Kartnerstrasse, mixing with the crisp spring air that drifted through the open windows. 27-year-old Catherine Rose Bellamy stood behind her mahogany counter, carefully measuring drops of essential oils into a crystal bottle, her hand steady despite the tremors she felt deep in her chest. Outside, beyond the elegant display of cut-glass flacons and silk ribbons, the city she called home for 3 years was transforming into something unrecognizable. The German army had entered Vienna 2 days earlier. The Anschluss, they called it, annexation. But Catherine, born and raised in Boston to a family that had fled persecution in Europe a generation before, knew the proper word was invasion. She had watched from her shop window as tanks rolled down the Ringstrasse, as soldiers marched past the Opera House, as her neighbors who had been friends just yesterday suddenly wore swastika armbands and saluted with outstretched arms. The speed of the transformation had been breathtaking and terrifying. Her shop, La Rose Eternelle, had been her dream. After studying chemistry at Radcliffe College, she had defied her family's expectations and moved to Vienna to apprentice with one of Europe's greatest perfumers. She had learned the ancient art of scent creation, how to blend top notes with heart notes and base notes, how to capture memories and emotions in liquid form. She had built a clientele of Vienna's most elegant women, had created custom fragrances for aristocrats and opera singers, had found a life that felt like freedom. Now, as she watched brown shirts march past her window, she understood that freedom was over. The question was what she would do with whatever time remained. The answer came that evening, in a way she never could have anticipated. A man entered her shop just as she was preparing to close, his uniform crisp and new, his accent unmistakably German rather than Austrian. He smiled at her, that confident smile of a conqueror in occupied territory, and asked if she could create a custom fragrance for his wife. Something sophisticated, he said, something worthy of the new order. Catherine wanted to refuse. Every fiber of her being wanted to tell him to leave, to take his uniform and his smile and his new order and get out of her shop. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was survival instinct, the understanding that resistance now would only bring immediate consequences. Or perhaps it was something else, a thought that was just beginning to form in the back of her mind, dangerous and dark and utterly compelling. She smiled back and said of course she could help him. She invited him to describe his wife, to share what scent she preferred, what memories he wanted to evoke. And as he talked, as he relaxed into the familiar ritual of perfume consultation, Catherine began to understand something crucial. These men, these conquerors, saw her as harmless, a perfumer, a woman working with flowers and pretty bottles. Beneath their notice, beneath their suspicion, completely and utterly safe. Now, I want to acknowledge something important before we continue Catherine's story. I know that our audience is made of intelligent and discerning people like you, people who recognize that history's most powerful acts of resistance often came from the most unexpected places. If you appreciate content that uncovers these hidden stories, that honors the courage of those who fought back in ways that history rarely records, I would be deeply grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these vital stories to light. The weeks that followed the Anschluss were a descent into nightmare rendered in bright spring sunshine and the scent of blooming lilacs. Catherine watched as Jewish businesses were marked and vandalized, as people she knew disappeared overnight, as the casual cruelty of occupation became normalized so quickly that it seemed impossible this was the same city that had waltzed and laughed just months before. She kept her shop open, kept creating perfumes, kept smiling at the German officers and their wives who now made up an increasing portion of her clientele. She was American, which gave her a certain protection. The United States was still neutral in 1938, and the Nazis were careful not to antagonize American citizens unnecessarily. She could have left, could have closed her shop and returned to Boston, to safety and family, and a life that didn't include watching atrocities unfold outside her window every single day. But Catherine had inherited her family's stubborn streak, the same quality that had made her ancestors flee persecution rather than submit to it. And she had also inherited something else from her grandmother, who had been trained as an apothecary in the old country before emigrating. Knowledge of plants, of their properties, of their healing powers and their more dangerous applications. In her shop, surrounded by bottles of rose and lavender and sandalwood, Catherine began to remember her grandmother's lessons. How belladonna could make the pupils dilate, how foxglove could strengthen the heart or stop it, how certain fungi could cause paralysis or convulsions or death, how many poisons smelled sweet, how toxins could be masked in fragrances, how death could be delivered in the form of something beautiful and innocent. The idea that had begun forming that first evening crystallized into something concrete and terrifying. She was a perfumer. She understood chemistry. She knew how to blend substances, how to calculate concentrations, how to create mixtures that would be absorbed through skin. And she had access to ingredients that, properly prepared and properly disguised, could be lethal. For weeks, she wrestled with the enormity of what she was contemplating. Murder, not in self-defense, not in the heat of battle, but calculated, premeditated killing. It went against everything she had been raised to believe, violated every moral principle her family had instilled in her. But as she watched the occupation tighten its grip, as she heard stories of people being rounded up and sent away, as the list of missing friends and neighbors grew longer, she found herself asking a different question. Was inaction its own form of moral failure? The perfumery had a basement workshop where Catherine created her custom blends, where she stored her raw materials and experimented with new formulas. It was here, in the cool darkness beneath the elegant shop above, that she began her real work. She started with plants she could grow in the small garden behind her building. Oleander, with its beautiful pink flowers and deadly cardiac glycosides. Monkshood, which could cause respiratory failure. Hemlock, which paralyzed the nervous system. She extracted compounds, concentrated them, tested them on herself in minute quantities to understand their effects. She documented everything in a notebook written in a code only she could decipher, recording doses and delivery methods and timing. She was meticulous, scientific, approaching the problem with the same attention to detail she brought to creating a perfect fragrance.